Warning! This video blog or vlog could contain harsh opinions or foul language. If you do not appreciate said content or material, well, you could just fuck right off.
Greetings internet people, RantingRamsay here. How are you all doing today? In the last video I uploaded, I alluded to the fact that I believe that we live in troubling times. And of course, the term troubling is a relatively relative. It's a relative term. And it's a little bit difficult to explain. I've got a short little bullet point list of some of the things that make me think that we are living in fairly troubled times, at least especially in the United States of America, which, you know, could have worldwide implications in some regards. No way it would in others. But so one of the first things that makes me think that we live in troubling times is basically the last 13 years of the United States presidency. You know, we started our slide with the man-child president, W, who stepped into office with a massive budget surplus, and over the course of 8 years of Bush economic policies, we went from relatively large surplus to, at that time I think it was about $1 trillion in debt. How you get there, I don't know. Oh, wait a minute. You get there by deregulating the banks and giving massive tax cuts to the rich. Both of which is what caused the economic slide. But the new guy ain't doing any better. We have a borderline Republican under the guise of a Democrat who it has ushered in an unprecedented level of like spying on its own citizens and failed to keep up with pretty much any of the promises that he made in his campaigns, and just questionable foreign policy, questionable economic decisions. Again, and it all seems to be leading up to a couple of different things. Like that's why I mentioned the 13 years of the past 13 years of the presidency specifically right off the bat, is because that seems to be the catalyst for the other two things that seem to be the major bullet points for me of why we live in fairly troubling times. Is that there is an undoubted declining world opinion of the United States of America, specifically its government. It's never held its citizens in very high regard. We know this. We're all fat, lazy, ignorant sheeple is pretty much the general world opinion, or at least as is presented on the internet. Take it with a grain of salt. But on a national governmental scale, the declining worldview of American government seems like a pretty clear conclusion to the last 13 years of the presidency, and the fact that our government is increasingly run by special interest groups, lobbyists, and corporations. That the voice of the people no longer seems to be being heard. Which is somewhat understandable because of my next point, which has basically, we now have one of the most massive divisions in the citizenry that we have ever seen in this country. Ever. That you could literally cut the country right down the middle when it comes to population, and these people that feel this way over here, these people that feel the exact opposite way over there, and in almost every single instance, almost, you're going to have almost exactly the same number of people on either side of the spectrum. And part of me says that just can't be coincidence. That has to be by design. And when I look at how American news media presents itself, when I look at the types of mindless entertainment we're presented with, when I see that something momentous on the world scale is not being covered in the news in favor of covering something that is obviously going to be very one-sided or the other. Kind of like, no matter what seems to be going on in the world, whenever something momentous goes on in the world, we focus on another shooting or killing that involves firearms, so that we can once again have the country split right down the middle on the gun debate. And I've said before that I believe that we are, as Americans, a society of complete and total distraction, which backs that up. It divides the citizenry, which lets our government further ignore what the people want, because the people don't even know what the government's doing, because they're too busy watching the World Series, or they're too busy writing letters about ending abortion or getting more gun control or whatever. It's... So that leads to a declining world opinion, which it just seems like, unless the American people can stand up together and say, this shit's fucked up, we need to do something about it, policies need to change, or, you know what, have a shit ton of people march on Washington and basically demand that everyone there quit their job. As fallacious as that sounds, I'm actually kind of halfway serious about that. It's one of the only things that you're gonna have happen that's gonna change any of this shit is if the American people stand up and say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not gonna take it anymore, basically. Unfortunately, we're so distracted by stupid shit that just doesn't seem like a very real possibility. But even if that did happen, there was a book by Orson Scott Card called Empire that outlined a scarily real scenario for the second American Civil War. And without going into the details of the plot or anything, what it basically theorized it would boil down to would be the American military, or what's left of it, versus the armed citizenry. That literally the citizenry would take up arms and go, you know what, fuck this, we're not having it anymore. And they would literally be fighting against what's left of the American military. Now, granted, there would be a portion of the military that would, I guess you would, for lack of a better term, defect or go AWOL and fight with the citizenry. In fact, a very good friend of mine thinks that this whole scenario is not plausible because so much of the American military would join the citizenry that there wouldn't be enough left to fight the people. Him and I have actually had many a heated discussion on this, and because I think it's very plausible and real that it could come down to, the people versus the military, and that even if the military lost this 25%, that's still more than enough, if all pulled back home to fight the battle with their advanced weaponry that 90% of the citizenry would not have any access to whatsoever. Sure, we've got a lot of guns. We don't have fucking drones, fucking cruise missiles, and smart bombs, and all that good happy horse shit. So, you ever seen the movie Red Dawn, the original? It would be kind of like that, except replace, the invading Europeans with, the American military. But once, that's all fantasy land at this point. But it seems like it could happen, which is why I say that things can be extremely troubling if you really think about it and look into what's going on in the world and what our government's actually doing. It does seem like they're clamping down further and further into a very real, actual police state, which can only be a prelude to something else, if you think about it. Why would they create a police state unless they're going to do something else? But then at this point, you're kind of getting into the realm of conspiracy theories, which I don't really buy into any of them in their completion, like the ideas and concepts that they present, kind of like I was saying, like, well, you know what, if this happened, then that could happen, and that could be happening because of this. I find that interesting to think about, but I don't necessarily put any credence in it. So, there you go. That's why I think we do live in troubling times. And I understand that this was kind of a depressing video. It's not things you want to think about, and you know, I bet there were some of my watchers out there that were hoping that I would take a more lighthearted approach and mention things like maybe we live in troubled times because of this or this or this or possibly something like this or this. But maybe we live in troubling times because of shit like this. I don't know. You make up your mind. I'm Ranting Ramsay. That is all.
Hey, did you get all that, man?
Douche.